Hello, my name is Erin Buchholz. I'm the plant health specialist at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chaska, Minnesota. We're about 25 minutes or miles rather west of the University of Minnesota campus, Twin Cities campus that is. And today I want to talk to you about how jumping worms can be matchmakers between researchers and public garden staff. We would love to do more research in our gardens, some of us anyway, and I'm happy to tell you all about that. So here are our learning objectives today. By the end of this, I hope that we can all describe the connection between botanic gardens, arboreta, and invasive species management because it is a core role of our responsibilities. How to modify current invasive species reporting tools to address soil-dwelling pests like jumping worms. How to determine public garden needs regarding jumping worm invasions, and also how to build relationships between researchers and garden staff based on our shared needs and goals. So invasive species in public gardens is something that we've always had to deal with. There are four pictures on the right side of the screen. I'm going to go through them quickly with you. In the upper left is buckthorn, of course. I carved a spoon out of the wood. It is a gorgeous wood, but it is a very troublesome plant that is choking out a lot of our forests. So it's an invasive species that we have to get rid of. In the upper right is an emerald ash borer poking its little head out of some bark. That one is newish for Minnesota. We've been dealing with it for about 10 or 15 years. And right now at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, we're right in the midst of losing a bunch of our ash to this insect. Lower right is the Japanese beetle. And this particular female has 4 eggs from the winsome fly on it. So we're still trying to understand biological control with Japanese beetles, and we're having a fun time doing that. And then the lower left is viburnum. It's the underside of a viburnum leaf with at least 3 larvae that are visible that are chewing damage into the leaf. And viburnum leaf beetle is a new one for us. We first confirmed it in 2023. So the important thing with public gardens and invasive species is that our gardens showcase plants from all around the world. But unfortunately, when we move a plant from one part of the world to our garden, it's not always just the plant that comes. We might have some soil-dwelling pests, some insects, other invertebrates, or even some pathogens come along with it. And that poses a new threat to our space because those pests don't always stay put. They like to move around, and without these natural checks and balances that are in place in their native range, their numbers can just go out of control in a very short amount of time. But the cool thing about botanic gardens and arboreta is that we work here on a daily basis. So we are sentinels. We are first detectors oftentimes for these plant pests because there are more eyes on the ground more frequently. So how can public gardens and arboreta continue to help with this? Well, again, unlike our for-profit peers, or unlike state or federal forest managers, our eyes are on the ground more frequently. Maybe they're only on the ground once a year at most. With us, we're checking them weekly, maybe monthly, but multiple times throughout the season. So if something new pops up, we can report it right away and get researchers on task to help us find management solutions for it. Horticulturists and arborists that work in public gardens have a vested interest in controlling these pests. And the main reason is, well, one, we're a tourist destination, and you're not going to get tourists if your plant collections look horrible. We want to keep them looking good, so we have high aesthetic standards. The plants themselves could also be incredibly high value or impossible to replace. Maybe the germplasm, the original seed source, is no longer available. And so we really need to maintain these plant collections so that we don't lose that particular plant. And there are also limited management options since we are open to the public, and also since many of our visitors come here for wildlife. We have a lot of bird watchers and other wildlife fans, and so we want to make sure that we're protecting them as well as protecting our visitors. And then finally, location, 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 right? You, as a researcher, are probably very, very close to a public garden or an arboretum, and they actually have many different types of landscapes. Don't think of these spaces as nothing but manicured turf and trees and garden beds. That's not true. A lot of us have wetlands, forests, parklands, formal gardens that are meant for large, beautiful displays, but also smaller spaces just like a homeowner would have. And we need answers for all of these locations, especially when it comes to jumping worms. Here are some examples here at our arboretum. On the left, I'm going to talk about viburnum leaf beetle again, just briefly. This particular picture shows you a very long viburnum hedge that's along one of our roadsides. You can see the right half is still very lush and very green. from, lack of viburnum leaf beetle damage, but the left half has been completely defoliated. And the difference between them is that the right half is typically in full hot sun all day long, something that the viburnum leaf beetle doesn't like. It doesn't like heat. It doesn't like full sun exposure. On the left side, it's more shady. So this is one way that we can help promote through a visualization that our visitors and homeowners in our area don't have to give up on viburnum hedges or viburnum plantings. They just have to think about where they're going to plant them. And that's wonderful IPM. It is a preventative measure, a cultural measure to put the plant in a proper place so that it doesn't get impacted by the plant pest. On the right side is Japanese beetle, so a little bit different. Instead of talking about placement, we're going to talk about biological control here, another tenet of IPM, of integrated pest management. We've been lucky enough to work with researchers in the Department of Entomology and the Department of Horticultural Science to assess how the insect and fungal biocontrol presence is impacting Japanese beetle numbers. And it's quite fascinating to see, because if the insect and fungal pathogens that impact Japanese beetles are successful, then we don't need to spray chemicals on them, which is something that we really don't want to do. And quite frankly, we're having a really good time proving that this is the case. On to jumping worms at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. I've been lucky enough to welcome researchers from multiple departments within the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences. And the research has centered mostly on quantifying the impact that jumping worms are having on forest plant communities. We've shown that the plant density and the plant species richness has gone down in infested areas versus uninfested areas, of course. We are also measuring and attempting to mitigate jumping worm caused soil erosion. And then finally, we've also worked with professors in the Department of Horticultural Science and the Department of Entomology to find nursery chemical options to use in nursery container plant production. So we aim to continue these as long as the researchers want to work with us, because quite frankly, these are our problems. Considering we're doing this research on Arboretum grounds, these are problems that we need solutions to. Now, there are current reporting tools that are available to public garden, botanic garden, and arboreta professionals to report new plant species or plant pests or existing plant pests, but they don't seem to be very well suited for jumping worms at this time. So the Sentinel Plant Network is run through American Public Gardens Association. It is primarily for North America, and it is focused on very, very specific known pests, usually insect pests, rather than novel threats. So if you're coming up with a new pest, there's no real way to use the Sentinel Plant Network to report it. The International Plant Sentinel Network is through Botanic Gardens Conservation International, so it is worldwide, and they have what's called a health checker guide. So it is kind of nice that you can report these symptoms, but for one thing, it's above ground only, so not appropriate for jumping worms. And then it also is for insects at this time. It does not cover pathogens or other types of invertebrates, but it's still a very nice tool. And then finally, public gardens as sentinels against invasive plants. Again, this is primarily North America. It has a wonderful, thorough record creation form that is easy to fill out online, but at this time, it is only focused on invasive plant species, as their name would indicate. This is against invasive plants. We think that that particular record creation form could be modified for insects, for pathogens, and of course for invertebrates, especially ones like jumping worms, which are soil dwelling. So my colleagues and I wrote this article for Frontiers for Forests and Global Change back in May on how to create a sentinel soil plant continuum, a reporting tool that does include soil characteristics. We believe that since the current reporting systems are not suitable for jumping worms, if we expanded them to include field observations of soil changes, that we can better document the impacts that jumping worms are having on our plant communities in these public gardens. The impacts that we can certainly measure from an observational standpoint that garden staff can do without having a thorough background in soil science or any other hard science would be the impacts to the O horizon. As you can see on this photo on the right, there is no leaf litter or mulch on the soil surface. It is just jumping worm castings. Those are absolutely characteristics that we can report in that form. From there, those observations, once they're reported, can go directly to scientists, to researchers, so that we can get more collaborators on board with what's happening, why it's happening, and what impacts are all happening, they're all having on this. So soil testing labs can be recruited, so researchers and even weather stations. And this can help with nutrient changes, cation exchange capacity, water flow, erosion changes, and certainly how temperature and moisture both impact the plant communities as well as the jumping worms themselves. And then finally, once the researchers have this data and are starting to interpret it to make sense of themselves, most of these public gardens have their own education staff, education departments that have interpretive specialists working with them. These interpretive specialists can help make this information accessible to members of the public. And if we get more members of the public on board with jumping worm research, funding opens up, space opens up. It's a win-win for everybody. Okay, so what happens next? Let's say we do actually create this sentinel soil plant continuum and we get it off the ground and botanic gardens are now able to make these kind of reports. Well, they're not going to be able to make these reports unless they are familiar with jumping worms, right? So do these gardens know, even if they have jumping worms on their site? What resources are currently available for these public gardens and arboreta to use? And then finally, how do land managers voice their concerns back to researchers? Well, luckily, we have created a working group called the Healthy Soil Collaborative. A lot of my fellow presenters for this symposium are members of the Healthy Soil Collaborative. And I love the mission. Science works better when researchers and stakeholders work together. While I have participated in some of the research, I primarily consider myself a stakeholder. I am a plant health specialist at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, so my responsibility is to make our plant collections as healthy as possible. And I can't do that unless I have a good working relationship with researchers. So it's in our mutual interest to find solutions to jumping worms. To that end, I've worked with other collaborators in the Healthy Soil Collaborative. So on the upper left here, you can see my name as well as my collaborators. We created a survey specifically for botanic gardens and arboreta for staff members to take to tell us what they know about jumping worms. You have to establish a baseline knowledge set. We can't work with these garden spaces unless we know what they know and unless we can give them resources so that they can improve their knowledge, right? So I actually created this poster along with my collaborators, and I'll tell you exactly what I did with it, but I want to give you a chance to pause and take a look at what this poster said. I will say that the QR code is no longer accessible. This was a closed survey meant only for public garden researchers. If you are interested in it, my email address will be at the end of the slide. I am happy to share a copy of the survey with you, but we're going to go through those questions together. I disseminated this survey at initially the American Public Gardens Association's annual conference in San Francisco this past June. Picture on the right is how it looks on my cell phone. I received 15 in-person responses during that conference. Not a super high number, so I took advantage of the APGA community email blast and I sent it again through email to APGA members on June 24th and again on July 11th. So I have a total of 42 responses, which is not terrible. My collaborators are the ones who are going to be responsible for properly interpreting these results and trying to quantify them some way. But I'm going to share the raw data with you right now just to give you an idea of what information is already available to these public gardens, what their knowledge is, and where hopefully we can all go together. So we wanted to start out again, just assessing that background information. Can you identify a jumping worm? And the good news is 35 out of 42 could. That means 7 of them got it wrong. And some of them were probably unsure and just did their best guessing and they got it right. But we want to make sure that that number is at 100%. We want people to understand the difference between a jumping worm and a European nightcrawler or some other type of earthworm species. We also want to know what the respondent's role was, just the person taking this survey, what department do they work in at their garden space? So, most of them were horticulture, but we had a really good response from leadership of gardens, which I think is very important. If leadership doesn't buy into the work that we want to do there, we're not going to get very far. Curation and education were all well represented, and I was happy to see that marketing, research, and others were also represented. I also asked them, okay, how familiar are you with jumping worms? Not just can you identify a jumping worm, because again, that's a guessing game, but do you feel that you are familiar with jumping worms? Over half said that they did. The others, maybe, maybe not. So I think that again, we can strive for a higher number here. We want to make sure that people are familiar. We've asked people what they have learned, where they have learned about jumping worms, how they learned about it. And this will create some of the biggest outreach opportunities for us, I believe. Again, 9 out of 42 said that they haven't learned about it at all. But look at the highest response rate. It was actually word of mouth. 20 respondents said that they've heard about jumping worms from word of mouth. So again, you just get one person interested in it and talking about it, and it can balloon out from there. But other areas that we would expect to see them, like extension sources, social media, other types of media, seminars, and on and on and on. People have found it. So some people have first-hand experience. So there's plenty of ways for people to learn about jumping worms. I did ask about their ecological zone or location. So in the upper right, you'll see an image of North America and the ecological zones within. Unfortunately, my Google form pie chart doesn't match up color-wise, but that's okay. I'm going to take you through it. 26 of the 42 respondents were actually from the eastern temperate forest, which in the upper right corner is the eastern half of the United States, that kind of medium-ish green that you'll see right there. Mediterranean California had 11 responses, which again makes sense. The conference was in San Francisco, so the in-person responses, probably a higher number would be from there. Mediterranean California on this map in the upper right is this lightest green that is right on the coast of California. The Great Plains is this kind of tannish color right in the middle of the United States, right in the central there. We got 3 responses from the Great Plains region. The marine West Coast forest is this blue that is kind of going up to British Columbia, Vancouver, and those areas. We had 2 responses from there. The temperate Sierras, which is in Arizona and New Mexico, I had 1 response. And then the northwestern forested mountains, that's the only one where the color actually matches up. It's the green, and you can see how widespread it is across North America. We had 1 response from that ecoregion. As far as geography goes, I asked them what state or province they were in. We got no responses from Mexico or Canada, and unfortunately, one of our US responses came back as not applicable. So, not sure what that meant, but that's okay. But still, it's important to tell you that 11 of the responses came from California, 5 came from Pennsylvania, 3 each from Wisconsin, Michigan, and DC, 2 each from Delaware, Illinois, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Texas, and 1 each from Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, South Carolina, and Washington. So again, most of them are from the eastern half of the United States, but we had decent West Coast representation, mostly thanks to California. I also asked them to describe their institution by all that apply. So like here at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, we have botanical garden areas, but we are an arboretum. We also have natural reserves, and we are affiliated with a university or college. We have a nonprofit organization that partners with us. So we meet a lot of these different things in here. So it's interesting to see how spread out they are and how much they might have to offer you based on the background of their organization. I also asked basically what the physical size of their organization is. So here we are just shy of 1,200 acres, quite large. But you can see on this pie chart, almost 2/3 of these organizations I would qualify as a smaller garden, especially compared to my organization. Other organizations that compare to our size, less than 12%. So it might be a smaller area than you might be used to working in, but there could still be a lot for you to experience. The services offered, again, this is another huge outreach opportunity for you. Over 90% of these garden spaces offer educational classes and events. In the 80 percentiles, you've got volunteerism. I think that's huge. Every researcher could use a little bit of extra help on their research project. They already recruit and have their own volunteer base. My goodness, wouldn't that be cool if you could get extra volunteers, participatory scientists working on your research? They've got it right there for you. In interpretation too, not all of us who are well versed in science can interpret our data to make sure it's accessible to the everyday visitor or home gardener. But with the interpretation services that these public gardens offer, you could have help with that. I did ask them, when did you first confirm jumping worms on your property? 24 of 42 respondents said we haven't confirmed it. And the others gave me different years. Really, there weren't that many overlapping responses. Some confirmed them in 2010, 2011, 2012, on and on and on, all the way up to 2026. So it's been very widespread. There's not been one big year where all of a sudden we had an outbreak of gardens say, oh my gosh, we have them. It's been a slow buildup, which I think is quite interesting. And I still feel like there are, of the 24 respondents, some of them might have jumping worms. They just haven't confirmed them yet. So I asked them, if you have confirmed jumping worms, where are you seeing them? Again, 24 out of the 42 said we haven't confirmed them, but of the others, it's pretty reasonable. I'm happy to see that wetlands, margins, and prairies and parklands are at 0%. That makes sense for me for the species of jumping worms that we have in Minnesota. We don't see them in wetlands because it's too wet. We don't see them in prairies and parklands because it's too dry and hot, but we will see them in most other places. So certainly plant production spaces like greenhouses and nurseries, some are seeing them there, which is troubling because that's where you're going to be moving your plants from to other locations in your garden. But still, alongside paths where maybe you have wood chips that were contaminated within herbaceous garden beds and tree and shrub beds, you can see them there too. I've also asked them, have you noticed disappearing acts with jumping worms? Have they disappeared from an area or reappeared or seem to spontaneously pop up? And unfortunately, I didn't word this question very well. So I gave you the Gemini generated responses just to give you an idea of what they were saying. Most respondents report that they have not seen a decline or an elimination. No one said that they saw jumping worms eliminated from one area. But they have seen decreases in density or overall numbers compared to previous years. We've seen that too at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. Drought years, we had 4 years of excessive drought conditions. Our numbers dropped. They did not go to zero, but they did drop dramatically during those years. There is some uncertainty in monitoring. Again, this is another opportunity for you. If you can help train public garden staff members on what they're looking for and how to count or document jumping worm presence, then you're going to get some good data out of them. It is in their interest to take this data as well because they want to know, what is our action threshold? When do we need to take action? And if you give them these monitoring tools, great, they're going to use them and they're going to give you that data, which is only going to help your data set. So the continued activity to run respondents said that populations are actively increasing following early July. I think that goes back to the education. Of course, we all know that by July, especially in Minnesota, by the end of July, we'll see a lot of adult jumping worms by this time because they've been hatching throughout this season. By July, they're big and they're very noticeable. So we asked them, how do you think you got jumping worms? 21 of them, again, it should have been 24, but 21 said we don't have them. But the other spread seems pretty reasonable, and we suspect that that's how we got them too, is they came in on purchased mulch or maybe our existing mulch piles, purchased plants. Yes, there are nurseries around the United States that are shipping plants and they have jumping worm castings, if not live worms in them. Certainly cocoons can hang out in there as well. Donated plant materials from infested gardens. A couple of them thought that visitors could have been carrying cocoons in on their contaminated footwear. Contractors, surprisingly, zero. We've actually had other types of invasive species come in on contractor equipment, so I was surprised that nobody really thought about that. And then neighboring lands, of course, if you're up against neighboring properties that have jumping worms, you're probably going to end up with them too at some point. I was very proud of the respondents who said unknown because that's a very honest and reasonable answer. We don't know how we got them. All we know is we have them here. What preventative measures is your organization using to prevent further spread? 30 out of the 42 respondents said they're not doing anything, which again, 24 of them said they haven't confirmed them. So that would make sense. But 6 of the respondents who have confirmed them aren't doing anything to prevent further spread. And that could be another way that we can help train botanic garden and arboretus staff. But some of them have, the ones that did answer gave some very cool or very good and thorough prevention efforts. Some of them came up with their own, like this less irrigation. I didn't add that to the survey as one of the options. They added that as their other answer, which I think is a good way to go about it as well. If you can hold off on irrigation, that might be a very good cultural method to prevent further spread. But certainly the others we've seen before. The difference between these installed boot brush stations, The one that received 4 respondents was for staff and volunteers. The one that received 2 responses was solely for visitors. So it's important to notice that distinction. And then visitor concerns. If your garden has been approached by visitors about jumping worms, what are they asking you? Well, 26 out of 42 said they're not asking us. 10 of them said maybe they're asking us, but they haven't asked me. I don't know. So then the remaining, 6 respondents gave different answers. Are jumping worms here? Are you managing them? How are you managing them? Are you doing research? 5 out of the 6 respondents who said yes, visitors are asking us, said yeah, they're actually asking us if we're conducting research. So that matters to visitors. Visitors want us doing research here at these spaces. Do you offer educational opportunities? What can be done about them? And this last one is actually about a hammerhead worm that a visitor found and it kind of creeped her out. Not really relevant to jumping worms. Well, except that they are predators. All right, so again, outreach opportunities. If your organization has conducted outreach, what have you done? 38 out of 42 have not done any outreach yet, which is forgivable because, extension is outreach, right? But public gardens do a lot of outreach for everything else. Why can't they do it for jumping worms? A couple of them have offered different opportunities. It can be in-person classes or seminars, virtual or webinar classes, print materials, or digital materials. And then finally, not finally, but second to finally, what does your garden need? So we asked these public garden employees, what do you need from the Healthy Soils Collaborative or other researchers or other land managers regarding jumping worms? For 1/3 of them said we don't need anything, which I think they don't know that they don't need anything. They don't know what they need, is what I'm trying to say. But the other respondents are just like, hey, we need management options, certainly. Our staff could definitely use some training, some professional development so that we understand jumping worms. That's a big one. Pre-designed outreach options. They want to help us do outreach. They just don't have the materials yet. So could we help them develop outreach so that they can deliver it to their visitors? And then some of them want grant funding and maybe they want help either designing or installing or paying for boot brush stations. These are all good things. So there are some opportunities there. And then finally, what are you doing to manage jumping worms, if anything? 32 out of 42 are not doing anything at all. Some are using cultural controls, making the site less hospitable for jumping worms. Some are physically removing jumping worms, putting them in a baggie, cooking them in the sun. One of them is enhancing biological controls, meaning encouraging predators to come in and eat jumping worms. Luckily, no one's using biorational pesticides because there are no pesticides registered at this time. Unfortunately, one is saying that they do use conventional pesticides. Oops. And then some of them are collecting and bagging soil. That was an add-in answer, but that would go under mechanical control, certainly. What research would help these garden staff and arboreta to focus on? What do they want researchers to work on? Well, certainly management is going to be the biggest one. They want help getting rid of jumping worms. And I know that that's a long road for us. We have to do years of research on that to make sure that our management options are safe for everyone and really only target jumping worms if possible. But they still want help with learning about mechanisms of spread, prevention efforts, the impacts that jumping worms are having on our communities, and to a lesser extent, detection and the biology and life cycle of jumping worms. But that's still going to help them. So where do we go from here? We have all this information. By all means, researchers should start connecting, if they haven't already, with their local or regional public gardens. Build these relationships, get to know the land managers because they're going to be your best friends. Train their staff on how to identify jumping worms, and they will do some of the work for you. There are many gardens that have their own funding sources and their own fundraising mechanisms. Some of these gardens are very, very wealthy. It never hurts to ask for their financial support if they can swing it. Maybe it's just an in-kind donation with labor or materials. Maybe they can actually float you some money. But be prepared if it's a smaller garden, they might instead ask you for some support from your grant that you've received. And then finally, jumping worm awareness really relies on outreach. Again, these organizations can welcome millions and millions of visitors every single year. My guess is that's millions and millions of visitors that you otherwise are not reaching unless you partner with these organizations. So use these organizations to your advantage by developing these relationships. If you have any other questions or guidance or suggestions for me, please reach out to me. My email is right here, buchh006 at umn.edu. Thank you for your time.